This is Jen from Cashmerette, and today we're going to look at the lining of the Canton Moto Jacket. Now, when we fully line a jacket, the jacket lining itself is a little bit longer than the actual hem of the fabric where it turns up. So what happens is you end up with this little pleat just at the very, very corner. So we're going to show you a way today to do this fully by machine with no hand stitching required. It can be a little tricky at first, but if you can follow along, it should be good. So for the purposes of today, I've just created a mock-up of a Canton jacket. It's just the shell and the lining. I have left off the sleeves and the collar because they're not really necessary for this, but I've got the shell, I've got the lining inside, and then I've created the facings in a different fabric just so that we can see what's happening. In your final jacket, the facings will all be the same fabric as this outer shell. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn the jacket so that the right sides of the shell is facing the right side of the lining. Okay. So now we've got this inside out and we've got the facings on top here and our main shell inside. We've sewn the shell and the facing together and the lining together along the neckline, around the neckline, and we've sewn them down the very front seams. The next thing we need to do is sew the facings along this bottom edge. Now, on this side, where we have a single 3 main fabric lining up with a 3 facing, this seam is going to be very simple. All the edges will line up just nicely. And we're just going to sew at a 1/2 inch all the way across. But we're going to stop right here at the seam allowance, 1/2 inch from the end of these 2 pieces. Okay, so we've now sewn along this side. We've just left 1/2 inch free at the end there. So our stitching has lined up with our existing line of stitching here. So now we're going to do the same thing on the other side, but this is slightly more tricky because we have this zipper that's running down this here, side here. So the first thing we want to do is move our zipper pull up out of the way. Now, we've got to be careful when we're sewing across here that we go right underneath the end of the zipper stop. And then on the main fabric, we actually have this little extension right here. So what I've done very, very briefly, we're going to mark in the 1/2 inch seam allowance around this corner. So I'm just going to do it by eye, but you can measure very clearly if you wish, but we just want to mark in so that we've got that exact point there shown. Now, if we again flip it over, we're going to mark the same corner on our facing piece, 3F. And we want to make sure that these 2 corners are going to line up. So if I put a pin through there, it should come out, look at that, right on the same side there. So now we're going to sew from that point across to the end, being very careful to sew right underneath the zipper pull there. So I'm just going to put a few pins in to hold it all in place. Okay, and then we're going to sew again from that corner right across. Now that we have our facings attached down the bottom, we need to attach the lining to the bottom of the main shell. So I'm going to flip this all around and open it out so you won't be able to see all of it at once. But as you can see, the main shell is slightly longer than the lining at this point. We're just going to move it down so that they're lined up. And we're just going to align up all the different seam lines. Now, at the edges here, the lining piece should match up very nicely with the main fabric. So we're just going to keep that one. And then on the other end, make sure we've got all of our seams aligned. Okay, so we've pinned it all together, so all of the edges are aligning nicely now. What we're going to do is we're going to sew this entire edge from this point to this point, but we're going to leave about a 6-inch gap right in the center somewhere, just so that we can turn everything inside out later. Okay, so we've now got the facing attached to the main fabric along the bottom edges, and we have the lining attached to the main fabric all along the bottom edge except for this gap in the middle. Because the jacket is asymmetrical, the next step is going to be different what we do on one side as opposed to what we do on the other. So we need to make sure that we're all working on the same page here. We're going to start with the side that has the center front as the front piece. So number 3 center front is exactly the same as the 3 facing. We're going to start work on that side. What we need to do now is we need to take the seam between the center front and the middle front, and on the back side it's the seam between the center front facing and the middle front lining. So we've got this seam and we've got this seam, and we're going to pull them apart. Now I'm just going to spin this around so that it looks very similar to what we have in the instruction diagrams. So we now have the 3 facing up the top here. We have the 3 main fabric. We have the middle front main fabric and the middle front lining. We need to sew the remainder of this seam and join it up with this seam. So if we pull this so it's facing upwards, we want the middle front lining to come all the way down, and then it's going to fold back around on itself. So it creates this little U shape. And that allows the middle front lining to come up onto the facing and become nice and flat. I'm just going to start pinning this in place. We want that there. So we need the seam between the facing and the front lining is going to line up with our little notch for the zipper there. Okay, so if we go back to what our image in the instructions looks like, we've got the 3 front and the 3 facing. We've got the main and the main lining, and then we've got it all nice and flat through this seam now. So all we're going to do is we're going to sew from the end of this seam, joining up to the end of this seam, right through all layers. Now, on this side, you can see that we had some top stitching that was holding the middle front facing in place. You just want to make sure that that's far enough back that you can see the end of that seam. Okay, I've now sewn this seam, joined up the 2 ends. It's laying nice and flat. So I'm just going to turn it inside right, and we're going to see what it looks like from the right side. So I just reach in through the gap, pull out this corner of the facing. So now we have the zipper ends right at this seam between the main and the facing. And when we flip it to the wrong side, you've got the main fabric folding up, you've got the lining coming down into a pleat over the extension, and then the facing is all just neatly aligned with the main on that side. We've now finished the left-hand side, that's all sewn neatly, and we're going to move on to the right-hand side. It's a very similar concept, except we don't have the extra seam running down between the front and the middle front. We've just got a single piece on this side. So the first thing we need to do is we need to make a snip. We drew our seam lines in here and we've sewn right into that corner, and now we need to cut right up into that corner. And we're going to use this line based on our seam line. So on the back side, we've still got the same seam between the 3 facing and the middle front lining. And then on the front, we're using basically an imaginary seam line, and we're going to pull them apart and it's going to end up looking very similar to this. So the one is folded back along that imaginary seam line from this side. We have it all lining up. So again, this too needs to come down and then fold back on itself. So if we look down from the top, it comes down and folds back on itself so that this extension is now fully extended. And we're just going to pin this in place. So this time, our seam is going to extend further, but it's just going to stop right here at that corner. It doesn't actually extend up into the... So I'm now going to sew from the end of this seam all the way off the end of the facing piece there that we can see. Right, making sure that this corner, it comes right to a point at that corner. So now we've sewn this last little piece of the seam. It can look like that. Spread it out. It ends up making a nice little square where the main fabric comes up into there. So now we're going to turn it inside right and have a look again. Okay, so now from the front, this is the right center front panel, and we have a seam with the facing, and then the hem extension is folded up and the lining is pleated down over the top of it nice and neatly. Okay, so that is now the lining attached, and you can move on to finishing off the sleeves.